This is Jed Disler, and welcome to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. Actually, today's guide won't be exactly friendly. I don't think so, because it's Thanksgiving, and when it comes to Thanksgiving, the first word that comes to mind is turkey. So I'm going to be talking about some genuine turkeys for Thanksgiving, if you know what I mean. We're first going to talk about a Beethoven concerto cycle with pianist Valery Afanasiev and the Mozarteum Orchestra of Salzburg, conducted by Hubert Soudan. And it was issued by Irms Classics. This is probably the most vile and odious Beethoven concerto cycle ever released on CD. Afanasiev's tempos, first of all, are so damn slow, and his playing is impossibly heavy and over-articulated. You just have to listen to how he articulates the fourth concerto finale's broken phrases with such exaggerations of the syncopation. It sounds like a bunch of drunken dancers in a conga line. I just couldn't believe it when I heard this. And then when I reviewed the disc in this cycle that contained the third and Emperor concertos, I wrote the following, and I don't think I could describe it more succinctly than in these words. Valery Afanasiev's cumbrous pianism. Did I really write the word cumbrous? I guess I did. His cumbrous pianism represents the Teutonic Beethoven school at its pounding nadir, as the first movement cadenza and much of the rondo bear out. Afanasiev's rhythmic gear shifts and the Emperor concerto's unaccompanied piano solos serve no structural, rhetorical, or expressive purpose other than to merely be different. Basically, the orchestra just functions as a doormat, and this conductor just allows this pianist to do whatever the hell he wants. I think this is probably the second most unlistenable Beethoven concerto cycle in the catalog. The Booby Prize, of course, goes to the period instrument performances of Arthur Schoendeweerd, where he plays on a period instrument and he uses a minimum number of musicians to a part. And these recordings sound as if they were recorded in a tiny closet or maybe even a sardine can. So you see, that's not a recommendation, it's rather an anti-recommendation. Now, let us behold what is potentially the worst Schubert piano music recording in the history of planet Earth. It features Simon Bartow playing the Schubert Impromptus, the Six Moments Musicaux, and the G major Sonata, Deutsch number 894. The sonata just swoons all over the place, or else it sputters and fits and starts. I mean, it's the most discontinuous, self-serving interpretation of this piece I've ever heard. Most of the impromptus and moments musicaux are vulgarly over-articulated, overstressed, dynamically exaggerated, and highlighted in multicolored ink so that no dullard will miss every obviously highlighted point. I mean, this playing is beyond micromanagement. And I'm saving, actually, the worst detail for last. Have you ever had a perverse desire to hear that sublime G-flat impromptu in the first book of impromptus stretch out to 12 minutes and 14 seconds, which is twice as long as the longest performances tend to be? I mean, this is pure musical sadism. And you know how the great pianist Sviatoslav Richter used to liken the recording studio to a torture chamber? Well, here is Simon Bartow in the role of the Lord High Executioner. And after listening for only 30 seconds or so, I start to shout out, "I confess, I confess." I mean, you just have to hear this recording to believe it. My goodness. Now we come to the most inexplicable rendition of Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition on the Piano of recent times. It features pianist Katya Bunyatishvili. I had been duly warned about this recording by several colleagues, but I thought, wait a minute. Can't be more willful or perverse than the Pictures and Exhibitions from Ivo Pogarelic or Maria Udina, right? Well, yes, it can be more unbelievably impossible than their recordings. Katya Bunyatishvili cannot get through a single movement of pictures without defacing each movement with interpretive graffiti. I mean, the promenades are fitful and twitchy, and her slow and really flaccid tempo reduces the old castle to a pile of dust. And her super, super slow and heavy-handed bidlow movement gets even slower toward the end, which is exactly the opposite of what Mussorgsky indicates. And of course, this pianist has to play the Ballet of the Unhatched Chicks faster than anyone on record. And it doesn't sound so much like a ballet as a Keystone Cops chase sequence in a silent movie. And what is with this pianist's long pauses between sections and Samuel Goldenberg and Schmoyl? It is true, granted, that this pianist brings out clever inner voices in the marketplace at Limoges, but because she works too hard over making interpretive points, the music just stops in its tracks, and there's very little continuity. However, Bunyatishvili's worst transgression occurs in Cum Mortuis in Lingua Mortua, where, when the promenade theme comes in, she plays it not in B minor, as written, but in B major. I mean, I've never seen any printed edition of the score. Oh, you hear all the sirens in the back? I think that's the Urtext police on their way to arrest this pianist. You hear that? You see, I'm not recording in a professional studio here. I'm recording this in my home studio. You see, you get all the kitchen secrets. But anyway, back to this very bizarre misreading. I've never seen any printed edition of Pictures at an Exhibition that indicates anything but B minor. So I'm wondering, how could such a blatant misreading go by without having been corrected? I mean, did this pianist's producer even notice or even care? I have absolutely no clue. In a way, I feel a little bad about giving a Golden Turkey Award to this cycle of the 32 Beethoven piano sonatas that came out on a small label that doesn't seem to have a name. But it's a really awful Beethoven cycle, and I feel bad for saying so, but you know, it is out there, and the pianist did sign off on it. I found this cycle for something like $10 at a thrift store. And it's one of the crown jewels of my collection, because when I have pianist colleagues come over to the house, usually I like to play them wonderful recordings that perhaps they didn't know about. But they always light up in anticipation when I tell them that I'm about to play them a sample of the worst Beethoven piano sonata cycle ever thrust onto the market. The pianist is the late Greek musician Rita Bubolidi. She actually made a very nice disc in the mid-1950s, I think, for the Erato label. I think it was on a 10-inch LP, and it had music of Schumann and Brahms. It's very good, and you can hear this on YouTube. But around 1980 or 1981 or something like that, Rita Bubolidi came out with an LP that contained the most lugubrious Brahms Piano Concerto No. 1 on record. I mean, it was so lugubrious that it made even Simon Bartow's later mauling of this piece on the Capriccio label sound like Leon Fleischer or Rudolf Serkin by comparison. Rita Bubolidi wanted so badly to be recognized as a serious Beethoven interpreter, and she certainly was serious about her business. I remember hearing her play a Beethoven concert that I think was part of a complete cycle that she gave in 1985 at New York's Greenwich House, and I remember that she seemed very sincere and very focused, but she was also really struggling quite a bit. And in these recordings, she does get through the notes, sometimes by the skin of her teeth, but she does play the notes. But to be honest, there's hardly one sonata that is either not way under tempo or just plain effortful or even unmusical or just simply ponderous in expression and execution. And I feel really bad, but, she did sign off on these recordings, and they really are totally uncompetitive. There's this story about how when Rita Bubolidi was recruited to play Ned Rorem's third piano concerto in New York, and this is a very demanding piece, and Jerome Lowenthal had premiered this piece, and he made a dazzling recording of it. Anyway, Ned Rorem went to coach Rita Bubolidi in the concerto, and he heard her play, and then he told her that her tempos were half the tempo that they should be. Anyway, she said something to Ned Rorem like, "Oh, but your harmonies are so beautiful that you really do have to take the piece very slowly," something like that. Ned Rorem did not buy that, and he said to her, "You just got to practice." So did she practice? I imagine she did. But many years later, when I asked Ned Rorem about this particular performance, he told me that it had transpired pretty much as he had expected, or perhaps just as he had feared. So anyway, you get an idea of what to expect from Rita Bubolidi's Beethoven Sonata Cycle. If you find a cheap copy of it, grab it for at least curiosity value, but if you see it selling for like more than $50, $90, even more than $15, I don't know. I wouldn't spend a lot of money on it. Anyway, I wish you a happy and peaceful and restful and bountiful Thanksgiving, and I hope that the turkey you are having with your family meal is much better than these Thanksgiving turkeys I've been speaking about on this episode. This is Jed Disler, and you've been listening to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. I'm afraid I wasn't all that friendly for this particular guide. Usually I'm very friendly. Anyway, I look forward to being with you next time.